here on the side. Let's go ahead and hop to it. We're 2 minutes after the hour. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Klein. It is a privilege to be able to speak to you today. We have a great lineup, and we're talking about innovation at the data layer, which is a really cool concept, especially for 2020, when every single day we're just generating more and more and more data. So how do we protect it? What are some kind of novel ideas as far as protecting data, some concepts around that? We have a great panel set up today to actually discuss some of these kind of nuances. First and foremost, it's my privilege to introduce Paul to you. Paul is from a company called TDI. Paul, I'm going to go ahead and put up your slides. If you'd like to make a personal introduction while I do that, please feel free to. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Daniel. Hoping everyone can hear me. If not, then comment in the comment screen and yell out. You might have heard me before, so to establish a bit of credibility, I've done quite a bit of interviews on the news and started a cybersecurity company 20 years ago and have been training here and there in different lectures around the world. And so if you have heard me before, my apologies. You both get to see my post-COVID hairdo or lack of haircut, and you have to hear me drone on yet again. And I have the dubious distinction of talking about all of the challenges and problems in cyber at a macro level, but particularly with a focus on data. As Daniel mentioned, if we could hold questions for an open session at the end, but I would love some engagement via commentary as we go along. So use the comment section. And before we begin, let me ask a question to get the ball rolling. Does anybody know how much cyber spend rose last year? Just comment in the section. Take a guess, percentage-wise. Anybody? Have I already lulled everyone to sleep? All right, well, Daniel, let's go to the next slide and spoil the answer for everyone.
All right, that sounds great.
So last year, as has been kind of the pattern for the previous 5 years, about 25% more of a cybersecurity spend than the year before it. And we start asking ourselves, well, with 25% spend, how is it that we also had nearly 20% more in cyber attacks? Why is it taking us 200 days to detect a breach? And why are we losing $6 trillion next year due to cyber crime as per these projections? And it's an interesting thing. The American basketball coach, John Wooten, once said, don't mistake activity for achievement. And it makes us reflect, I think, a bit with 3,000 tools. We have over 3,000 tools and more than 2 decades of experience in cyber at this point. So if you compare us to software development as an example, we are nowhere near the rigid life cycle that they have, where data is used to reflect metrics on performance. And so we start asking ourselves, well, what are we doing here? And listen, I know it's hard. We face countless challenges. Daniel, if you go to the next slide, please. In trying to address how do we perform better in cybersecurity, whether it's again the 3,000 tools and deciding what to do with them, or the absence of a shared lexicon when having conversations about cyber. For example, if you're reporting as a CISO to your board, are you saying last month I had 10,000 vulnerabilities and this month I have 5,000 vulnerabilities? Do you think they understand what that means? And do you understand what that means contextually? There's a lack of meaningful metrics and KPIs out there, and the risk management and threat landscape just continues to change. And we've got compliance framework X and compliance framework Y. If you start doing business with credit card, add compliance framework Z. And oh, by the way, by 2021, we'll have now 4 million shortages in jobs. And that shows you when this slide was made just months ago, it was 3.5 million. So the landscape continues to change such that the stakes that we're facing are incredibly high, but at the same time, we're spending more, we're doing more, and we're facing a ton of these challenges. But maybe in facing these challenges, we're approaching it the wrong way. Daniel, next slide, please. And maybe the issue is we are asking the wrong question. Let me ask you, and maybe we'll get some comments in the question now. why are you spending money on cyber? Why? What's the driving point for what you're doing in cyber? Or better yet, what are you doing? What are the challenges, the major challenges that you're facing right now? And start thinking about that and comment on that before we get to the next slide. But generally, we are asking ourselves this question, what are you doing? And often we come up with an answer such as, well, you know, I've got ISO 27001 requirements I've got to meet, and I'm compliant. And I do my every 3 years continuous monitoring drill with NIST. So I'm compliant. I can do work with the US government. Or now the Department of Defense in the United States has the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification that's coming. And we'll definitely be compliant with that. And we patch within 30 days, and we've got these great policies that have been updated, well, maybe a long time ago, and we spend X% on our IT budget. But ask yourself, does that really indicate at all how well you're doing? And when you measure this against the level of maturity in other industries and other practice areas like IT, for example, it's very clear to understand in general IT or network parlance how well you're doing. Well, when a system is down, I can tell you my SLA is that it'll be up for 99%, and I'm meeting that SLA. And if you're measuring someone on their sales performance in any industry, it's pretty clear. I've got a goal to sell $10,000. I either met it or I didn't. And in project management, you have 3 pillars of cost and technical and schedule. And using the right data, you're able to measure whether you're performing against that. Listen, if I walk into a boardroom anywhere in the world, whether it's Japan or Singapore or England, and we're talking about some of the corporate goals that almost every organization has around financial value or financial health, if I see an income statement in front of me, I'm speaking the same language as everybody else in the boardroom because we all know how to read it. We all have a common lexicon. We all know how to measure performance with respect to finance. Well, 25% of the Fortune 500 now have cyber as a corporate goal. How many of those folks in the boardroom do you think are speaking the same lexicon about how they measure their cyber performance? I'd wager it's less than 1%. So now to the question, which nobody, I think, answered. Oh, maybe Daniel, I may just be inept at opening this.
No, we have one that says their goal is to promote productivity. That's from Rich. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Rich. I like that. Daniel, if we could go to the next slide, please. So we did a lot of asking this question, why and what are you doing over the last 20 years of my business and trying to get an understanding. And there are lots of drivers of why. I don't want to be the next New York Times that gets hacked. I don't want to be on the front page, not my organization, not on my watch. And I don't want to spend about $4 million per breach or have increased cyber insurance costs that I have to deal with respect to cyber risk insurance. And I don't want $5 million per ransomware attack. And you might say, okay, to address that, what I'm going to do is I'll look at these frameworks and these benchmarks, or I'll find a percentage of my IT budget that I drive towards. But is that at the end of the day providing you the answer you want? And it's funny, I mentioned cyber insurance. I think we all know on the phone at this point, but that the cyber insurance industry is struggling with the fact that they don't have any actuarial data. But the one thing that they are saying to the organizations they insure is, if you can show me how you're performing better, your rates will go down. The problem is, as I said, if we keep asking the question of what are you doing and not how well you're doing, you have no measure of performance or return on investment. Daniel, next slide. And so these answers are lost because we're not asking the right question. So a little bit of empirical data. Over the last 20 years, we've done a lot of surveying and understanding our customers around the globe. So if you look at a $10 million spend on cyber, about 55% is services, managed or otherwise. About 22% is on software and 14% on hardware. But did you know that nearly 30% of that budget spent on cyber tools goes unused? And many organizations say that 60% of their cyber software is never even touched. And 23% of their cyber analyst time is wasted. So asking these wrong questions mean, yeah, you're using tools and you're wasting analysts' time, because you're saying, I'm doing framework X, I'm spending the industry norm, I've got the next gen firewall, but at the end of the day, and we'll touch on this in a moment as to why, you're throwing away at least 20% of your budget unless you're focusing on performance and using the data to do it. Daniel, next slide, please. Okay, so let me first say, I get it. It's not easy. This stuff ain't something you just come up with in a vacuum. And we talked for years with a number of CISOs to survey them on what is it that makes it so damn difficult to measure KPIs. We know that this is the only way to see if you're doing things right, to take the central foundation of data and measure our performance with respect to that data. And the top challenges that most CISOs had indicated were almost 80% didn't have the right staff. And we're finding that organizations below 3 billion run rates still only have 3 to 5 personnel supporting them. So you just don't have enough folks, and you don't have the right folks. You don't have the automation. Almost every one of our surveyed CISOs said, we don't have this kind of tool available to us. And the majority of them said, we just don't have the time. But at the end of the day, the focus being on, well, I've got the next gen firewall and I'm adhering to this framework, isn't focusing on the one thing that'll stop most attacks in the first place, by just doing the right things. And this again goes back to performance. And to that end, Daniel, next slide, please. If we ultimately want to change the paradigm, we've got to stop asking the same old question of what are we doing and start looking at how well we're doing, because that's performance that we ultimately can measure. Can you imagine being able to instead answer to your board, we have crown jewel assets that we know are the most critical, and we know that we scan them every day, and I can prove it to you. And we know that while we rolled out multi-factor authentication, 55% of those users have expired credentials now. Or that are we actually scanning 100% of our assets? This is data that we can measure. In fact, I would wager, I'll throw it out there, I don't know who wants to actually answer this one, but how many people know with certainty 100% of the assets in their environment? And these are the things that we ought to be looking at. Okay, Daniel, last slide. So my contention, and back to this 20%, our contention, is data is the foundation of everything that we should be looking for in terms of cyber performance and effectiveness management. And when you change that question to how well we're doing as opposed to what we're doing, Stanford research proves out that looking at across any domain, whether it's cyber or high performance rowing, if you are running an organization or you're running a team and you measure with respect to performance, with respect to how well someone is doing or an organization is doing or a team is doing, your performance increases by 20%. And the contention is, if you use this foundational data the right way to measure performance and effectiveness, management becomes the solution to increasing performance by 20%. And of those CISOs that we interviewed, that's the good news, is they do see value in this. And as the industry starts to change to that end, I think we use that foundational data to advance cyber to be where software development is in terms of a genuine rigor that we can measure. Daniel, last slide, just a quick pitch on TDI. We've been around 20 years, as I mentioned. We've worked with customers across the globe, and we've used that experience to build a solution that in fact is focused on risk and effectiveness performance management. And with that, I turn it back to you, Daniel, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that very much. Well said. We'll go ahead and queue up our next speaker. So thank you very much. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for Paul, go ahead and put them in the comments section. Just put to Paul, : and then your question. I'll go ahead and categorize those so that when we get to the question and answer section at the end, they'll be prepared and sent over to him and he'll be ready. In the meantime, it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker for this conversation today. Let me just close that out. Rajiv comes from a amazing company called Tech Mahindra. He is a leader within the cyber and security world. Rajiv, it's my honor to be able to introduce you to today's panel. Sir, if while I bring up your slides, you'd like to make a personal introduction, be more than welcome to.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. And I'm Rajiv, and I head the Global Cybersecurity Unit at Tech Mahindra. It's a privilege to be on this forum today. What I'm going to talk about is some of our recent experiences post-COVID, how we're seeing the changes in the trends in cybersecurity. Can I have the slides, please?
Absolutely. Just 1 second, please. I'll go ahead and share the screen. And there we go. Should be coming up now, sir. All right. Okay, there we go. Should be on the first slide, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm going to talk about is the kind of trends and the challenges that we've seen in recent times. I think it's a given that the way the entire business has moved remotely has been a big challenge for corporates and organizations. Imagine a situation that we would have the corporate network, which used to defend against cyber attacks externally, is now having all the users sitting outside the network. Clearly, this is a huge problem, and it also has led to a lot of business continuity issues. So at the end of the day, corporates really have found a challenge to deal with the current investments they have made. And the World Economic Forum, with whom we have partnered, have actually come up with this study, and it really talks about how this needs to be dealt with. So some of the things that I will bring up as key points here are the board of any enterprise today is equally concerned and has been working on cybersecurity resilience governance. I think the governance of all of this really needs a board mandate. It is even to the extent that I've heard of situations where you have independent directors with background in cybersecurity now being looked at to being brought onto the board of companies. So clearly this, along with the principles of zero trust and planning for crisis management, all of these are initiatives which are well understood across the world from CISO communities that we have been talking to. Thank you. Next slide, please. I just want to bring up a little bit about the kind of cybersecurity attacks and the trends that we see. These are some of the typical threat vectors that we have seen as a distribution across in different markets and different places in the world. Not just one market, but it's an average of several markets. I would just talk about this recent challenges that we have seen in India. The last 12 months have been, there has been a spate of attacks, and it's definitely not reducing at this point of time. It's only just going to increase. There's also this particular thing about the military attacks that we have seen recently in the cybersecurity world. And we've been tracking this very closely to see what needs to be done to deal with it. So there is a very focused nation state level challenge that we are facing today. And this is not just us, but all of us. So clearly we have the enemy out there who's trying to bring down the nations and also trying to bring down critical infrastructure and businesses in those countries. Next slide, please. So if I were to try and see how an enterprise was to look at the kind of challenges that are today, these are the 6 different domains of security that actually stand out as the key focus areas for any organization. And an enterprise really is about an environment which is IT, IoT, OT, mobile, and cloud. Now, all of these environments cut across these are these 6 domains. So these 6 domains are where an enterprise really has to comply with. A lot of the things that are happening today are around non-compliance for a board, and also having the threat vectors being very challenging for an organization to deal with. The investments which have been made by the enterprises are really not adequate today. And those are the places where today the optimizations services have started to happen. For example, there are several tools that you find in cybersecurity which are deployed over several years in an enterprise. Now, all of that doesn't really help just because you had all those tools. So you look at optimization, which is trying to see how to bring together point products and compress them into one integrated platform. So it's all about platformization of cybersecurity products and services. And the outcome that one delivers is what an enterprise looks for. So different challenges for different CISOs and CIOs across the world. And I've been talking to a lot of board members in different organizations, and I see most of them are talking about how can I make my enterprise secure and compliant with the least amount of investments. Since the investments in the past have not really worked to the extent they would, because the challenges from cybersecurity are growing at a faster rate than what the investments have actually been. So really, these are the 6 areas where we see a lot of work that is coming up, which is to do with helping enterprises deal with the challenges of maintaining an integrated security posture. And that's the risk appetite of an enterprise that really matters at the end of the day. Next slide, please. I just want to take an example. A lot of the challenges around applications that we see. Now, one trend that's been really there, that application in the traditional world would have been done by different technologies and different people and different vendors. What we're seeing is a kind of a consolidation there. And we're saying that the technology itself is a lot of automation. The automation is a key attribute in terms of bringing cybersecurity closer to the customer with a way that actually matters to, it reduces the time to respond, and it also brings in the ability to deal with end-to-end security. So from application threat assessment to protection to remediation, all of this can be offered now by single platforms. So this is truly an amazing time in the world of cybersecurity, that at one point you have so many products, but the new trend that we see is where technologies are now compressing and bringing out one source from where you can actually manage your end-to-end security. So it's eventually a security as a service that enterprises are asking for. And we see this to be like a trend that would continue to accelerate. There's a lot more of use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, scripting, integration between products and technologies to bring this to a kind of a logical one source of truth in defending an enterprise. Next slide, please. The other area which actually has brought in a lot of interesting trends recently, and we're seeing this to be the next 2 years of revolution in the world of cybersecurity, which will be from 5G. Now, 5G with this kind of ability to create the revolution in the enterprise world, where you have millions of connected devices, is definitely going to create a multi-fold increase in the threat surface, the threat environment that actually one would see. So with the current challenges, what we see today, we expect an exponential growth in the kind of challenges that would have to be dealt with 5G. And this, again, whether it's a connected enterprise or a smart home, whether you're using 5G in your business, whether it's a hospital, whether it's an enterprise of like a bank, all of these experiences are going to increase the threat vectors, and we need to prepare with different technologies, with the different integration capabilities. For example, software-defined networks are going to be one of the key areas that 5G is going to be all about. How do you really make that happen when the current enterprises are still with a lot of legacy investments they have made, and they need to transform? So the next 2 to 3 years is going to be intense transformation within the enterprises to move to the next generation capability and platforms that would actually help them to deal with the kind of emerging business opportunities and the resultant challenges. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I would talk about this, as a one last line of defense, which is the most important. Everything revolves around the data. How do you protect the data? And at the data layer, today, there have been many technologies that people have tried and tested. But one of the things that really matters is it self-protecting data? And I think that's the intelligent data that's going to be the future. Most of the kind of challenges that we've seen are, how do you prevent if the data was to fall in the wrong hands, if the data was to be misused, and so on. So this is really the world that we are going to see. And I think there is a huge opportunity there for the world to realize that even if all your defenses were to fail, the perimeter, the applications, they were all to be breached. If it's the data that's really protected, at the end of the day, that's the real meaning of what the defense really is all about. So I think the opportunity was to really create a self-protecting data that actually can even destruct should it fall in the wrong hands. Clearly, these are some of the things which we see are the trends. And in our experience, these are the kind of areas which would bring a radical change in the way we were to defend against the cyber attacks and the kind of challenges in the future. Thank you. Next slide. I'll just take a minute to talk about, Mahindra Group, which is a $21 billion group, multiple businesses, and Tech Mahindra is a $5.2 billion company. We've been in the marketplace providing a lot of digital transformation services, and cybersecurity becomes a key element in all of these transformation programs that we are helping our customers with. A lot of this comes from our global experience working with telecom when we started off several years back, and then building this across different domains like healthcare and BFSI and so on. This is the real world from where we see end-to-end transformation happening in our clients. Networks are getting transformed, businesses are getting transformed, and cybersecurity has to keep pace with all of these emerging challenges. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Rajiv. All right, so if you have questions for Rajiv, go ahead and put them in the comments section, and I will take note of those. Just put to Rajiv and then your question, and we'll go ahead and send those over to him so that when the Q&A section comes around, everyone can kind of hop off of there. Brilliantly done, Rajiv. Thank you so much for that. That was amazing. So next up on our speaker panel for today, we have Jeff Snyder from Certainty. And Jeff, I will go ahead and bring up your slides, sir. If you want, in the meantime, to go ahead and give a personal introduction to yourself, feel free to do so. But ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Snyder. Jeff, you might be on mute.
You hear me now?
I can hear you now, sir.
Okay, sorry about that.
All good. I'll go ahead and bring up your slides. All right. Rajiv, you had a comment from a participant here saying great presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Jeff, would you like to give a brief introduction for everyone on the call? Jeff, are you there? I think you're on mute, sir.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Perfectly. I can hear you perfectly.
So I'm really sorry about that, but it's an honor to be here. I'm the founder of a company called CyberStratus, which really focuses on strategy, business development, mergers and acquisitions. Prior to that, for 9 years, I was vice president of cyber at Raytheon Company. We deployed $4 billion in cash and bought 20 cyber companies, building out our portfolio in the cyber domain. We're 25,000 customers, half federal, half commercial, half US, half international, so a very balanced portfolio. And I'm also honored to serve on the advisory board of this great company called Certainty, which is all about empowering data. and creating intelligent data. So if we go to the next slide, please. So some of these have already been addressed, but what I'd like to do is pick out a couple. The cyber attack vectors really haven't changed. They've just really become a lot more stealthy and much more sophisticated. But three things bother me more than all the other attack vectors or attack venues on the slide. With COVID-19, phishing has become a very significant attack vector for all of us personally, because everyone's concerned about it. So if you get an email relative to how you minimize the effects of COVID-19 and for you personally and your household, and there very well may be an attachment associated with it, guess what? People are going to open the email, they're going to open the attachment, and then there's malware that is compromising them and potentially their businesses because they're operating in a remote way. The other two issues, and Rajiv brought this up relative to IoT, I'm very concerned about the Internet of Things and what that means from a cybersecurity perspective, because everything is becoming connected today, whether it be your baby monitors to your smart refrigerator, your smart TV, everything connected via your Wi-Fi network. So the attack vectors are many, and once a perpetrator does have access to your Wi-Fi, there's the potential for them to also access your work networks through your VPN connection or whatever kind of connection you have. IoT and the security vulnerabilities associated with it are out of control. And there's a president-led organization called NSTAC here in the United States, NSTAC. We did a very detailed assessment, which went to the president, relative to what cybersecurity vulnerabilities are going to be inherent in the IoT as it evolves. The other issue that I think is very concerning is the black market implications through the dark web. And if you don't have a computer science background or an electrical engineering background, but you're a history major, for example, and you want to buy a cyber attack tool, they are available. Depending on how much money you want to spend, you get a better attack tool. And they are fairly easy to use. So the black market implications, I think, are really a situation we need to deal with as well. The others that you see here on the slide are very typical of what we've seen for many, many years. So if I could go to the next slide, please. Some of the changes here in Washington that are impacting the United States in its entirety, as well as having implications for the world, for the globe. Our presidential executive order that focuses on better securing our nation's critical infrastructures, of which there are 16, and they're defined by the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, National Infrastructure Protection Plan. You know, one is the finance sector, for example, one is the energy sector, for example, one is the defense industrial base, for example. But it really establishes significant standards in terms of how we protect those critical infrastructures. The issue is the owners and operators of those critical infrastructures, for the most part, are commercial companies, and many of them are publicly traded. So it establishes a baseline for commercial, publicly traded companies to meet with. Otherwise, you run the risk of C-level liability under class action lawsuits. And the same applies for the NIST cybersecurity framework. And friends of mine developed this framework for NIST, by the way. It doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what to do, but it tells you the types of investments one would need to make. And you can see on the right side of the slide, those are the elements of the NIST cybersecurity framework. The types of investments one would need to make to establish and meet certain thresholds based on their cyber risk tolerance. So the issue about that is that, and it applies for the most part to the commercial world and publicly traded companies. The issue for that, again, is that it's motivating firms to exercise due care in the event they are attacked. and don't have the insurance coverage, as Paul alluded to meet the demands of their loss. So we're seeing some significant issues that are taking place here in Washington that have implications for the entire country and the entire world. So if we go to the next slide, please. And this is good. It's a build slide, but you did it all at once. So what I wanted to do is just share a typical cybersecurity architecture. You can see intrusion detection and response. I mean, we will have a perimeter typically of IDSs and firewalls, hopefully migrating to intrusion prevention sensors through the use of artificial intelligence. All of that is tied together in a SOC, Security Operations Center, or CSIRC, or a CERT. Call it what you want, they have different names, but monitoring the cyber risk on a 24/7 basis. There may be encryption involved, much like there is with data protection, program protection planning, and information assurance. I think that is a very unique and important initiative that was launched by DoD when Undersecretary Kendall oversaw that part of DoD, which really focuses on things like secure software development, anti-tamper, information assurance, secure code development, etc. Cross-domain technologies, you see, those are, I believe, very, very important to simplify the architecture, particularly if you're operating in multiple levels of classification or multiple levels of interest in a commercial company, or priority in a commercial company. And if we move from a protection level 3 to a protection level 4 environment, you simplify the architecture roughly by 40%, reducing capital costs and sustainment costs associated with the architecture. Secure code development, supplier integrity, and that gets to some of the issues that Rajiv mentioned relative to supply chain security and supply chain risk. But what becomes increasingly important when we're developing applications is to, before the first line of code is written, to do it with security in mind. And what industry has found is that if you write code for an application and it's scanned by one of your typical scanning tools to identify vulnerabilities inherent in the code, it will identify roughly 30%. So it still leaves a pretty darn significant attack vector. But if you develop the code with security in mind before the first line of code is written, and judicious practice and training of software developers, you can increase that number from 30% to 70%. So in essence, 70% of the code is protected. It still leaves an attack vector. And those numbers can be confirmed, one, by Raytheon, who I was involved with for 9 years, but also companies like FedEx. Those are the numbers that they use. And then all the research that goes on among and around the security architecture, threat research and assessments. The other issue that I think is increasingly important is insider threat monitoring. And most will suggest the fact that 50% or more of the cyber threats really come from the insider. So that is a big deal. Actually, the first company we bought at Raytheon was Oakley Systems, purely an insider threat monitoring company. It was probably a little bit ahead of its time because of privacy concerns, but now it's launched across millions and millions and millions of seats around the federal government and commercial world. So all of these bundled together really create a nested, layered approach to cyber defense. The issue is, all of this is penetrable. It is. And I was involved, along with Paul, my friend Paul Ainella, in a CISO Millennium Conference in Nashville a number of months back. And these issues came up in a keynote panel that Paul and I were involved with. And what I sensed and what I heard was that all CISOs will not deviate from what I'm sharing with you right now, but they're all now also focused on the data layer, the data level, because they recognize architectures like this are penetrable. And if so, the perpetrator will have access to your data unless you protect your data. So if we go to the next slide, please. So this really is the capstone of the discussion here. And there was an article written by International Data Corporation, IDC, which is a Washington think tank, a couple of months ago, and it really focused on these issues. It focused on the fact that your perimeter security solutions are penetrable. You need to focus on the data level. The article was entitled, "Data is the New Endpoint. Data is the new perimeter." And we need to be thinking that way. So how can you infuse intelligence in the actual data so it can secure itself? It can control itself. It can govern itself. It can eliminate itself if someone is trying to access it that should not be attempting to do so. The other thing about this approach is it's completely independent of the security architecture. It doesn't really matter what kind of architecture you put in place, based on my last slide, in terms of IDSs, firewalls, SIM tools, all the other tools that you might integrate into your architecture. It really doesn't matter because you're focused at the data level. Encryption remains important, but if you can have selective decryption relative to the user, relative to the understanding of who, when, where the user is attempting to access the data, it becomes very, very powerful in that way. Key management becomes a big issue, as you all know, relative to encrypted environments. But if you can randomly and dynamically generate embedded keys in the data on the fly, it simplifies that entire process. And what these elements really do is to protect data at rest and in transit. And you know, if I think back to Rajiv's comments and his emphasis on the cloud, for example, and the evolution to the cloud. So I'll talk about the federal infrastructure here in the United States, but we release every 2 years or so the top priorities for federal CIOs. And what is the #1 priority that has been launched in the last release of this? It's migration to the cloud environment. And every federal CIO needs to defend why or why not they can't embark to the cloud environment. #2 priority is data center consolidation. Somewhat similar, but obviously to reduce the capital infrastructure associated with the organization and help it to be a lot more efficient. So I just want to echo, Rajiv, some of the comments you made, and Paul, some of the comments you made, that it's here to stay, but it does infuse additional security risks. And the way to mitigate those is to focus on the data. And with that, Daniel, we'd open it up for questions.
Yeah, wow. A great speech. So there's very few times, I'll speak on behalf of the attendees for a second, comment below if I'm talking out of turn, but it's very few times where you get a bunch of folks together from especially information security, cyber world, and they're in agreement on such a granular level, strategically in alignment. Certainly wasn't planned today, but it's really nice when you get a whole bunch of very knowledgeable folks on and they're all singing the same song. So we actually have a really great conversation going right now in the comment section, talking about something that Paul and Jeff, you guys both touched on, and that's what are we measuring to say we're successful versus how efficient that success actually is. So Jeff, I was hoping to get And I believe Rich was also hoping to get some comments from you guys about whether or not you think there's a gap between what NIST is saying is important and what's actually effective.
Jeff, I'm happy to jump into.
Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say the frameworks, and to clarify one of my points in the hopes that it didn't come across the wrong way, the frameworks that have been established over many years are incredibly valuable. The point that I was trying to make is by saying we're adhering to NIST controls doesn't mean you're effectively managing how well you're doing that. So if the overall domain of cybersecurity covers 17 control families, and within each one of them, we've identified critical things that an organization should look at. Number one, they're not all critical to every organization. And that's when it comes down to, how do I take a framework that's well thought out and apply it to my business goals and objectives, to my cyber goals and objectives that align to those business goals and objectives? And then how do I measure my organization to make sure I'm doing it well? Because we can say that patching is a critical control family and we have to do it within X days and we set the SLAs. Well, are you doing it? And that's the paradigm shift that I was trying to address. I absolutely see the value in many of these frameworks.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you, sir. I had another comment here for Rajiv, and the comment is whether or not you see more enterprises where different technologies overlap one another and there's too much overlap, and so there's some efficiency that could be gained from that lack of overlap, or if you see enterprises that have gaps and they're looking to fill those gaps, and just kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things here. On one side, you have what we call the compliance frameworks. For example, if you're looking at NIST, we've seen a lot of the organizations from a technology perspective have either excessive deployment of tools in a particular space and gaps in some other spaces. So when you look at the main parameters by which you measure NIST, we found a lot of that happening in organizations where there was a mismatch or a disbalance between what you need and what you actually have. So one of the things has been to see that if you can optimize this by having the right balance between what you need and what you have, that itself is a big exercise and a big benefit to the organizations today. Then comes the next part, which is how much of this can you automate? How much of this can you make it more efficient in terms of ability to detect and respond? All of that brought together with the least amount of number of touch points and technologies. Because the more technologies you have, the more complexity that you gain. And in the process, you have lost the opportunity of picking up vital security alerts and threats that those tools are throwing up. And the integration challenges that you see typically in the organizations really means that one would end up having very little outcome from multiple tools and technologies. So the trend is first to be compliant, what is required to be compliant, what do I have, and then balance out between what is required to be compliant and what I have invested in. Then one moves towards the fact that you have automation benefits that one can bake in. I think those are the kind of things a lot of the organizations are really working on today. And it is about budgets that actually can be managed well. We've seen tremendous amount of benefits for enterprises doing this exercise. It's not a very long drawn exercise, but it's pretty straightforward. It's been done very well. CISOs have come back and told us that these are the kind of tools and exercises that these tools optimization were actually done have helped them to present to the board for further investments with you're keeping your eyes open. That's it. With your eyes open, you know what you're really investing in. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow.
Daniel, if I can build on Rajiv's comments, please.
Absolutely. Just one second. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the Q&A section of our panel today. So if you have questions for our guests, panelists, feel free to put them in the comment section below and we'll get to them here in a hot second. I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Rajiv, I really like your comments relative to the last question. And quite frankly, I think the word that you use that I think is imperative and important is automation. And it's driven by the fact that we have such a shortage of cyber professionals here in the United States, approaching 1 million and growing at a double-digit CAGR, that anything we can do to automate the process, infusing artificial intelligence, machine learning, so actions are taken in an automatic way with the analysts then verifying what actions are taking, increasing the sensor per analyst ratio in a SOC from 35 to 50 to 1,000. How do you do that? Your whole point about automation is so important, both in the United States and the world. It really is.
Thank you. Thanks.
So on that, I kind of have a question for, I suppose, Jeff and Rajiv. So with this gap in capability where we need folks who are trained, educated, capable, and there's a huge gap between where we are today and that end state, do you think we're going to be able to make up that gap, or do you think automation is just going to become core to the future?
Well, if I can address that, there's an organization in Washington called the Business Higher Education Forum. Dr. Brian Fitzgerald is the CEO. He's Harvard-trained PhD, a very, very brilliant man. And they've been working on cyber for the last few years. They've gotten grants from the Department of Navy and various other federal organizations, really to focus on the workforce. And these are his words, not mine. Of all the computer science and electrical engineering PhD graduates in the United States, 35 a year stay in academia. 35 a year. And obviously you've got to overcome attrition because some are retiring, right? So how do you increase the throughput of cyber graduates when only 35 PhD graduates are staying in academia? It is a big problem. I have the honor of serving on the board of a number of universities. The most powerful one, in my opinion, which I'm aligned with, is University of Central Florida. Second largest university in the country, 65,000 students, probably number one, or will be number one soon. They have a cyber club. It has over 500 members. They participate in the collegiate annual cyber challenge, and they've won 4 out of the last 5 years. It's almost like SEC football, Daniel. It really is. It's gaining that level of interest at the university. They get trophies. We actually sponsored it at Raytheon for a number of years, and we bring the winning team up to the White House. They meet with the vice president, pictures at the White House. We take them up to Times Square, and the promotion associated with the organization is prominent in Times Square. But the real issue is, how do you increase the throughput associated with cyber professionals that we need? And Rajiv, you need in India, you need it. Different parts of the world that you operate in.
Absolutely, and I echo that, because we've seen that the cyber education programs today also need to be getting an opportunity to see actual practical experiences, and a lot of that is missing in the academia. So we've tried to figure out a way to bring in interns into our organization and give them an opportunity to work on actual projects in cybersecurity, thereby giving them an exposure on how to deal with real life situations in cybersecurity. Obviously, they have to be mentored and all of that. But again, this is not good enough. The rate at which the demand is actually increasing is by far the biggest challenge today in terms of meeting the requirements of headcount in cybersecurity. So I would imagine that this is going to be more and more of artificial intelligence that is going to be there, that's going to be playing a key role. So all the technologies that we see today are heavily reliant on AI. And this is, again, the big thing, that what you have today in the enterprises, how do you optimize that? When I talked about optimization, it's also about use of AI to the extent that you are able to bring down the dependency on human-driven or human dependency in managing those tools and technologies. Yeah. Thank you.
Totally agree. Okay, guys, we have 3 open questions, and I'm going to ask you these questions in the order they were received. We have about 2 minutes left. I do want to be respectful of y'all's time, but it looks like we might go over. So if you want to hang around for some pretty cool questions, feel free to do so. The first question is from Raymond, and he asks whether or not the cybersecurity law industry is keeping up well enough with technology, or if it's falling behind. Jeff, you want to give a crack at it?
Well, I had the opportunity to speak at a lawyers conference in Texas a couple of years ago, and there were all attorneys in the audience, so it was kind of interesting for me. But they're all really concerned about cybersecurity implications of their business, and particularly in the federal marketplace, what it really means if you're a federal company like a Raytheon or like a Lockheed Martin, and you're pursuing business that has significant cybersecurity implications. I think it's a learning process for them. I really do. It is going to take time. And Rajiv, I'm sure you have comments about that at your level within a major corporation, but it is going to take time. But I will suggest the fact that among the attorneys that I've briefed, presented to, and deal with, there are significant concerns.
All right, thank you, sir. Next question, also from Raymond. Do you see continuing education courses being used more to get more students through? It takes curriculum to change based on the growth of the technology. So do you guys see continuing education as being a major factor in bridging this skills gap?
I can jump in. I absolutely do, Daniel. I think technology in general, in terms of as an overall curriculum, I think academia is shifting a little bit to understand that the 4-year, particularly liberal arts degrees in the United States, given what seems to be a growing dearth in IT and cyber personnel, kind of sets up the requirement for us to be a bit more flexible and having continuing education fill some of that gap. I think it goes beyond that. I think ultimately, if we really want to make a change, there's got to be some philosophical differences in the way we're approaching cyber and technology education in general, starting in earlier years. And we've got to get a bit more innovative too. I mean, I think there's some really neat things that, take it as an example, Children's National is partnered with Capital One for children that are coming in to be seen at the hospital, giving them iPads or Capital One pads or whatever it is to teach them different things in technology. If we get out of our way a little bit and come up with ideas like cyber attack video games, and kids start seeing this when they're younger and get excited about the craft, that's when you start changing the thinking a little bit. I think we've got to kind of crack that traditional mindset of how else can we train and start getting into how else do we engage. And that's a philosophical shift more than it is a tactical one.
Well said. Very well said. Let's see here. We have one last question. How can we get cyber professionals to see or realize that when we do security, we're not just doing security, but doing risk management? In my experience, many shy away from doing risk management. That's a good point. Any comments on there, guys?
That's probably a good question for Paul, given he's invested $3 million in CNC.
I think well, thank you, Jeff, for the setup. I think the answer does lie a bit in the presentation around getting the boards, getting these C-suites to understand that effective risk management or cyber performance management or the combination thereof, and understanding how effective we are in our craft saves them money. Whether it's on one side of the spectrum of punitive damages, or the other side of the spectrum, which is, well, we're actually just doing better with less. And whether it's a workforce multiplier through technology, or whether it's allocating resources in the right places, I think that's kind of it it's unfortunately, I think the question is the right question, because we've all faced it so many times. Oh, why are these damn auditors coming here? And we think, we're not auditors. We're here to help you be better. And that's so that you're more effective in executing your main business objectives. It's so that you can address the cyber goal that's now up there as a corporate strategic goal. But again, this takes a lot of education. We have our battles both internally and external with respect to that, so it's not easy.
Definitely agree there. All right, so as we wrap up today, I'm going to go ahead and share one last slide with our speaker's contact information, and then offer up a little bit more for everyone on the call still. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking with everyone. I'm super excited that you were able to join us today. This is part of a series that we're doing the next several months. So once a month, every 5 weeks or so, we'll gather together with some industry leaders and offer up new insights into the cyber information security world. Here are our panelists' information. This will also be sent out to you in an email probably in the next day and a half. And in addition, we're going to hopefully post the video replay of this. So if you thought of a question, not just now, but in the future, put it in the comment section of the video where you're seeing the replay, and we'll be more than happy to reply back or get you an answer back from one of our panelists. Again, thank you very much to all the panelists for joining us today and taking time out of your day to answer some amazing questions, to offer up your insights. And thank you very much to all of our attendees for joining us today. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Bye for now, guys. Have a great day.